natural land looks peaceful, until night falls. Then every creak from the barn starts to sound alive. Story 1. The Massey farm had been empty nearly 30 years, time enough for the structures to settle into a skeletal ruin. I'd come for the light, the way it shafted through the rotten siding of the main barn, carving golden geometry out of the dust. The air outside was thick with sun, and the scent of hay dust gone sour. But the instant I slid the huge, swollen door open, the light vanished. It was like stepping into a sealed, waiting tomb. The darkness inside was absolute, a heavy velvet blanket smelling of mildew, dry rot, and something else, something metallic and sharp, like old blood, maybe just rust. My flashlight beam cut a weak, trembling cone against the vastness. The place was immense. Beams disappeared into the cathedral ceiling, laced with cobwebs that looked like tattered gray shrouds. Below, the floor was a mix of compacted dirt and splintered wood. I kicked something, a broken harness, the leather stiff and cracked, and the resulting sound echoed far too long, swallowed by the oppressive height. I froze, listening. Drip, drip, drip. The sound was steady, somewhere deep in the back corner where the old stalls were partitioned off. I moved slowly, the beam cutting through the stagnant air. The place hadn't just decayed, it felt violated. The feeding troughs lining the wall were overturned, splintered as if something massive had fought its way out. That metallic smell intensified as I neared the back wall. My respiration grew shallow. I could practically taste the grit and the decay. When I aimed the beam at the far corner, I saw the truth of the smell. The dirt floor wasn't dusty and neglected like everywhere else. Here, it was disturbingly smooth, almost packed down, like someone had been turning it over recently, maybe shoveling it, or maybe just stomping. Then I saw the rope. It was thick, industrial-grade hemp, severely frayed and anchored tightly to the lowest support beam near the floor. It didn't stretch up to the loft. It looped down, cut clean off at the anchor point. The bitter end of the rope disappeared entirely into the smoothed-out, freshly packed earth. My chest tightened until breathing became painful. This wasn't just historical decay. This dirt was worked. The stillness in the barn wasn't silence. It was the absence of immediate noise, the deep quiet of a space waiting for its occupant to return. The slow, steady drip, drip, drip was the clock counting down. I didn't wait for a shadow to move, or for the heavy earth beneath my feet to shift. I backed away, my feet dead silent on the disturbed dirt, the flashlight beam jumping wildly. I slammed the massive barn door shut, the sound a desperate, inadequate finality. The outside sunlight felt blindingly fake. I didn't look back at the skeletal silhouette of the Massey farm. I just ran, leaving the metallic odor trapped inside that suffocating darkness. Story 2. The hinges shrieked a protest as I pushed the barn door open, a sound that scraped against my nerves like fingernails on a blackboard. Dust motes danced in the slivers of moonlight that pierced the gloom, illuminating a chaos of decaying farm equipment and the skeletal remains of what had once been livestock. The air was thick, heavy with the smell of damp earth, mildew, and something else. Something cloying and vaguely metallic. I'd come here on a dare, fueled by cheap beer and the bravado of youth. The old Miller farm, abandoned for 30 years, was the stuff of local legend. Whispers of disappearances, of strange lights in the upper loft, of a farmer who went mad and was never seen again. Now, standing in the oppressive silence, the legends felt less like stories and more like warnings I'd foolishly ignored. My flashlight beam cut a shaky path through the darkness, catching on cobwebs that hung like tattered shrouds. Each step I took on the creaking floorboards echoed in the cavernous space, amplifying my own panicked breaths. I climbed the rickety ladder to the loft, the wood groaning under my weight. Up here, the moonlight was more generous, casting long, distorted shadows that seemed to writhe in the corners of my vision. I told myself it was just the wind, just the settling of an old building. But the wind outside was still. Then I heard it. A faint, rhythmic thudding, coming from directly beneath me. It was slow, deliberate, like something heavy being dragged across the dirt floor below. I froze, my heart hammering against my ribs. It wasn't the sound of an animal. It was too methodical. Carefully, I peered down through the gaps in the floorboards. The flashlight beam wavered, then settled. And I saw it. A dark, amorphous shape, hunched over. It was too dark to make out details, but I could see it moving, a slow, dragging motion. And then, it stopped. A profound silence descended, deeper and more unsettling than before. I held my breath, straining to hear anything, but there was nothing. Just the thrumming of my own blood in my ears. Then, a whisper. So faint I almost didn't hear it. It seemed to coil around me, from no discernible direction. It was a single word, repeated over and over. Mine. The sound wasn't human. It was a guttural rasp, like dry leaves skittering across stone. I scrambled back from the edge of the loft, my hands fumbling for the ladder. My flashlight slipped from my grasp, clattering onto the floor and plunging me into absolute darkness. Panic surged, raw and primal. I started to descend, not caring about the noise, just needing to get out. As my feet touched the main floor, I heard it again, closer this time. The dragging sound, faster now, accompanied by that dry, whispering rasp. I didn't look back. I ran. The barn door slammed shut behind me, the shriek of its hinges a final, mocking farewell. I didn't stop running until the familiar glow of the town lights was in sight, my lungs burning, the whispers of mine still echoing in the hollow spaces of my mind. I never went back to the Miller farm, but some nights, when the wind is just right, I swear I can still hear that slow, deliberate drag. Story 3. The farm was called the Rafters Place, long abandoned, sitting like a collapsed lung beneath a bruised sky. I was only looking for photographs, the kind of industrial decay that sells well as moody art. But as soon as I pulled up the gravel drive, the air felt thick and wrong. The main bank barn was vast, built to house a town's worth of cattle and hay. The corrugated metal roof was rusted to the color of dried blood, and the massive sliding door, warped by decades of harsh weather, was half open, leaning precariously on its lower track. I slipped inside, pulling the door shut behind me, not out of caution, but instinct. The outside light vanished instantly. I was plunged into a suffocating, absolute darkness, broken only by thin, dusty shafts of gray penetrating the high ventilation slits. The air inside was a chemical mash of decay, stale grain, dry rot, and a sharp metallic tang I couldn't place. It was cold, yet humid, a century of trapped, stale breath. I turned on my flashlight, the beam cutting a weak cone through the swirling dust motes, illuminating the cavernous interior. The place smelled like forgotten death. I moved slowly along the broken concrete floor of the lower level, past the rusted, skeletal remains of old milking stanchions. The sounds were all wrong. Every footstep echoed not just in front of me, but seemed to multiply, twisting up into the towering hayloft above. Then, I heard something else. It wasn't settling wood or the wind. It was a slow, heavy drag, a sound like a sack of wet feed being pulled across the rough planks of the loft, directly over my head. It paused when I stopped moving. My heart hammered against my ribs, choking the air in my throat. I told myself it was vermin, or maybe a piece of tin shifting in the breeze, but the movement was too deliberate, too heavy to be a raccoon. The dragging sound started again, a slow scrape, pause. It followed the main beam, moving toward the far end of the barn, where the massive vertical walls of stacked, mummified hay bales reached up into the blackness. I needed out. I spun around and bolted back toward the entrance, my flashlight beam bouncing wildly over the filthy planks. I reached the sliding door and grasped the heavy, rusted handle. I pulled. Nothing. I braced my shoulder against the edge and shoved, digging my heels into the concrete. The track was fused, the metal seized tight. The door screamed, a desperate, protesting sound, but refused to yield more than an inch. I froze, listening. The dragging had stopped. The silence that replaced it was heavier, colder than any noise. I killed my flashlight, hoping the resulting anonymity would buy me time. In the sudden, absolute blackness, I felt the barn shift. Not a tremor, but a profound structural groan from the high timbers. And then, a small, soft sound began directly above me in the loft. A steady, rhythmic thump, thump, thump. It wasn't dragging anymore. It was the sound of something settling, of a dense, heavy mass being gently lowered in the dark. I sank to the floor, flattening myself against the cold, abrasive wood of the stuck door. I could feel the dust infiltrating my clothes, the cold seeping into my bones. Whatever was up there was done moving. It was waiting, patient, breathing the same ancient air I was. I wasn't in an abandoned barn. I was sealed in a vault built for slaughter, and the dark was finally coming down the stairs.